we did get a little bit of something, which was RJ Barrett went on a podcast, not this podcast, unfortunately, went on a podcast with his Duke buddy, JJ Redick, and he said a lot of things. Did you listen to this podcast, Jeremy?
I did, John. I did. It was a very good podcast. I really enjoyed it. It was insightful. And there's some great things that I learned about, just that as an average person wouldn't necessarily know without that type of kind of peeling back the curtain. So it was nice to get that perspective from RJ.
I will come out and say that I got the Cliff Notes version of the interview. I did not sit and listen to the whole thing, but I got what I needed to get out of it, and I agree with you. It's the bites that I heard and the things that I read about that he said, nothing bad, right? Was there anything that anybody said was like, this is concerning from this? Because I didn't catch that if there was.
Well, he did mention that there was this podcaster and content creator named Jonathan Macri who he's eating a live crow at some point because of the doubts that he had. It was weird. I don't know. But other than that, it was pretty run of the mill.
I can't find the crow.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to order you.
Maybe the crow flew away.
Maybe it did. Maybe it went back to RJ.
Maybe you finised eating it.
That
we need to send you a new one.
I'll never be finished eating the crow. Yeah. I will never be finished eating the crow. No, so listen, you actually listened to the thing, so I'll let you tee off this one. Of all the stuff that he said, he talked about DeMar DeRozan. He obviously talked about Tibbs. He talked about a lot about Duke, predictably, because this was with JJ Redick, another Duke alum. And he mentioned his extension a little bit. Out of everything he said, what would you say was, I don't know, your biggest takeaway, your favorite thing that he said, whatever you want to go with it?
I'd say it was nice to get an understanding of where he needs to go after facing the Hawks last year. And I think that that's something that kind of gets swept under the rug, in that it's fine to be bad, right? If you want to try to be bad and play the lottery odds, that's one way to do it. But there is also something to be said of getting playoff experience and then growing from that. And I think, as he described it, where often he would go to the basket, so the Hawks would try to get Capella onto him, and RJ recognizing the need for more of a pull-up game because he can go under a lot, and just how can he pull up and learn? And that's where he talked about as well with DeMar DeRozan, where he wanted to maybe work with him because his footwork is so impeccable, and even said to DeMar during a game, I'd love to work with you in the offseason because your footwork's crazy. Kind of just learning about all of that, and then how it applies long-term. And then when you see these younger teams, like as I've been watching Grizzlies and Timberwolves, it's very clear how young and inexperienced both teams are, and how this can actually pay off down the line for both franchises. But that, to me, the ability to not just play meaningless games at the end of the season, to actually fight for something, get some exposure to what it's like, and then see how you can improve from there. I really loved that.
It's interesting because we tend to, doing this podcast every week, we tend to focus so much on the micro of it all as it's happening. And we focused a lot on RJ's kind of explosion as he took on much more of a high usage role starting on New Year's Eve and moving forward to the end of the season. But if you look at his 3 years in New York in total, obviously not perfect, but if you were to kind of map out purely from a development perspective, a 3-year stretch where it's came in to arguably the worst situation imaginable, had a really tough time of it, and then things eased up in year 2, got that playoff experience as a clear number 2, number 3 kind of guy, because Rose was here too. But he was an off-ball guy. And then into year number 3, no playoff experience, but the team fought, and the team was playing for something. It wasn't like I'm trying to think of the season to compare it to. It wasn't like 18, 19 or 19, 20, or any of those seasons where it was they were out of it, early on. They fought, and they believed they could still get into the play into the very end. And RJ takes on this big usage role. I think after 3 years, I'm happy with where the development curve has gone as far as the track that he's been on and what he's done with it.
I would agree with that. And I think a big factor will be the efficiency, mostly because it seems like that's where a lot of people who maybe detract from what RJ Barrett has done sink their teeth into. And it's
It's fair to a certain extent.
Sure. I mean, it's something he absolutely needs to work on, but it also feels like, there's certain players where their inefficiency is a mere blemish, and for a player like RJ Barrett, where it feels like it's everything and he's just this ridiculous scorer and that's it. But he doesn't care about the quality of shots or how he's able to do it and all these things. So
completely agree.
It's frustrating. It is what it is. He's going to work on it. I like the fact that he's going to work on the pull-up game. That's something that the Knicks clearly like in players, especially 1 through 3 who pull up. So that's going to be a very fascinating development. But the last thing he also mentioned was about an extension. It was kind of this like joking response with JJ Redick, because the question was asked, are you going to resign? And talking about how it's been so long since Nick has re-signed off their rookie contract. The last one being Charlie Ward in 1999. Of course, you could make an argument that Mitchell Robinson is up for that first, but he wasn't a first round pick. So even still, if you want to narrow it down, the first round pick to re-sign with the Knicks hasn't been since the 20th century. That's pretty sad and pathetic, but RJ was laughing about it. And basically he wants to be here long term. That was the implicit understanding. And when you also hear about how, again, this is the only place that he worked out for, he loved the Knicks through his grandfather, who said, according to RJ, that, RJ, you're going to be a Knick one day, all those things. So, and I'm sure just being in New York, being the guy, that's a pretty cool thing to be. So I would imagine that the Knicks would probably like to get something signed, sealed, and delivered, whether it's a max contract in the form of 5 years, whether it is something less in terms of years and in terms of finances. Because of course, if he signs a 5-year deal, it would just have to be the max. It can't be like 5 years and short of the max at this point, this offseason, specifically by the deadline in October. But we'll see. It seemed like this kind of I'd like to be here too, and hopefully they can find some common ground.
I'm not sure if you heard, I pitched my prediction to Fred Katz last week that they would wind up at 5 for 150. What did you think of
that? Well, the thing is, wouldn't it have to be the following offseason where they do that? 5 for 150?
He could accept
for 5 years.
Explain.
My understanding is that for 5 years, it would have to be at the stroke of midnight on the second day of free agency. That's when they're we got those tweets about Trae Young and and SGA, but midnight. It started at 6 p.m. on the first day, and then 6 hours later, that's when they could officially sign. So for RJ, it's either the 5-year max or waiting a bit. So they could give him a 5-year deal. It would just have to be the max, unless they wait until the summer of 2023, in which case it's a different story. But then there's that gap of where RJ is not tradable, not that they would look into doing it. So I don't know. Maybe they ultimately decide on, maybe it's a 4-year deal and it's the same amount financially that you're saying, but just 1 year shorter. Maybe it is the full 5-year max. I really don't know where it falls. And again, as I've said, I would give RJ the max, but I'm also I want to be transparent here. That's much more of the heart talking probably than the head, which is often something I try not to do as much. But I believe in the talent. I believe in the amount of, building around him, even if he's not going to be the guy, just having him be there and showing a commitment. Hopefully it's less. I'd love for all of these star players to sign for less, and then you could just keep adding them. But regardless, it would be great to just see him remain in uniform, and that's that.
It's an interesting point you make in terms of if it's at 5 years, it has to be the full max. I guess in that case, I would skew more towards the Jaren Jackson Jr. contract, which was a little bit higher than that actually, because that was that was 4 for 105, right?
Yes, and I mean, I don't know if this is the biggest factor, but Jaren Jackson Jr. is having such a bad playoff series that I'm not using that as an indictment against Jaren Jackson per se, but it's also the thought of how do you value bigs? How do you value wings?
Yeah, I'm just talking about it in terms of a comp for money. I think that would be something that I would probably.
I think that the Jaylen Brown one is closer, honestly.
Yeah, the Brown 4 at the time, it was whatever it was. Yeah, it was 4 for, I think it was 4 for 115. Maybe I'm a little high on that
with some bonuses included.
Yeah, with the bonuses, and if you factor in the escalating cap, point is, I think if you got him to $30 million a year, even if it was $30 million a year with it would take the maximum incentives to get to that $30 million a year. I think that's a nice round number that he would probably go for. But who knows? We'll see.
Well, for context, just really quickly, the 30.5 is what the RFA's max is this year. So increasing it, it'd probably like, I don't know, 32, maybe 33 when you consider whatever the following year's salary cap is.
Yeah.
It's not that far off from the max. So it's kind of that one of those, like, it's close, but not the full thing. So maybe, who knows?
Yeah. We'll see. Look, as far as the interview goes, and then we'll move on. I like the fact that he did it. I like the fact that he's 21 and he's cool with going on a podcast like this and just having a wide ranging conversation over the course of an hour about anything and everything. Like Julius did this a year ago, and he did it coming off of a year that was great for him. And it shows that RJ, I think, is in a good place with himself, with the organization, with everything, which is good, because one of the fears that I know I've had at times this season is that the way this year went, it took a lot of the good vibes from the Big 15 season and it flushed them down the toilet. And while I think some of the good stuff went away, obviously the good stuff involving Julius Randle in particular, and to a certain extent, I think involving Tom Thibodeau and the relationship between him and the front office, there is still a lot of good vibes here, and it's the good vibes at the place where you want it to be, which I think is with the young players. And RJ is obviously first and foremost among that.